A woman stops walking. She is holding her young daughter's hand in a quiet neighborhood on a January morning in 1947. Something in the vacant lot catches her eye. She thinks it is a store mannequin someone threw away. She moves closer. And then her entire body locks up. Because what is lying in that winter grass is not plastic. It is not discarded. It is a young woman. And she has been cut completely in half. The body is so clean it almost looks staged. No blood anywhere on the ground. No footprints leading to or from it. No sign that anything violent happened there at all. Which means whoever did this did not do it here. So where did it happen? And how did nobody see a thing? Subscribe to Midnight Crime 247 right now and hit the bell. We cover the cases that never get fully told. Drop a comment with the word Dahlia if you already know this story, because I promise you do not know all of it. Let us go back to the beginning. Elizabeth Short was 22 years old when she arrived in Los Angeles. She was not famous, she was not a star, she had no major connections. What she had was ambition and a face that people remembered. She moved through the city the way many young women did in that era. Hotel lobbies, late-night lounges, bars where dreamers gathered and traded stories about the life they were going to have someday. People who knew her described her in ways that do not quite match up. Some said she was quiet, almost withdrawn, careful about what she revealed. Others said she was warm, flirtatious, always laughing, always the center of the room. Those two portraits do not belong to the same person easily. And that contradiction would follow this case for the next 8 decades. Elizabeth wore black often. Dark dresses, dark clothing, dark lipstick. She was striking and she knew it. But the name Black Dahlia was never something she was called while she was alive. That name came from the press after her death. Partly inspired by a 1946 film noir called The Blue Dahlia. Partly invented by reporters who needed a headline that would sell papers. The name was never hers. It was given to her by people who turned her death into entertainment. Remember that. Because it matters more than most people realize. Now here is the first thing that gets overlooked in almost every retelling of this case. Elizabeth's movements in the final days of her life are genuinely unclear. Not slightly unclear. Deeply contradictory. The last confirmed sighting of her alive was on January 9, 1947, outside a hotel in downtown Los Angeles. She was seen speaking to a man. Nobody got a clear look at him. Nobody got a description that held up under scrutiny. From January 9 to January 15, when her body was discovered, is 6 full days. 6 days that remain largely unaccounted for. In a city of millions. With a woman who was social and visible and known to many people. Nobody credibly reported seeing her. That gap is not just unusual. It is one of the most disturbing silences in American criminal history. Where was she for those 6 days? Was she held somewhere? Was she already dead? Nobody knows. And investigators in 1947 did not focus on that gap the way they should have. The crime scene itself told a story that went beyond the horror of what was immediately visible. Elizabeth's body had been severed at the waist with surgical precision. Not hacked, not torn. Cut cleanly and deliberately at a natural anatomical division point. The kind of cut that requires anatomical knowledge. Confidence with a blade. And time. Her body had been completely drained of blood. Then washed. Then transported. Then posed in a very specific position. Arms raised slightly above her head, legs separated at a deliberate angle. The posing is significant and criminologists have noted it for decades. This was not disposal. This was display. The killer chose a location that was open and visible. A vacant lot on a corner that was regularly walked past. The body was positioned to be found. Not hidden. Found. And there is something deeply calculated about that choice. Because it shifts the question from how to why. Why would someone want this body discovered? What did they want people to see? Within days of the discovery, something happened that shifted this case from horrifying to unprecedented. A package arrived at the offices of the Los Angeles Examiner. Inside were Elizabeth's birth certificate, personal photographs, and her address book. All of it had been carefully wiped clean with gasoline. Every fingerprint removed. Every trace of the sender eliminated. But the sender had left something else. A note constructed from letters and words cut out of newspapers and glued onto paper. Like something from a crime novel. The note taunted investigators. It suggested the killer was watching the coverage. Enjoying it. Feeding off the chaos they had created. Now stop and think about what this actually means. Whoever sent that package was organized, calm, and methodical even after committing a crime that would have sent most people into a complete breakdown. They took the time to collect her documents. Wipe everything with gasoline. Construct a note from newspaper clippings. Address a package. And mail it. That level of composure is rare. And it tells behavioral analysts something important. This person did not feel guilt. They felt pride. If you are still watching at this point, drop a comment with "still here" because we are about to get into the part of this case that most documentaries skip entirely, and I need to know you are with me. The investigation that followed was one of the most chaotic in Los Angeles Police Department history. Within weeks, over 150 people had confessed to killing Elizabeth Short. 150. Every single confession had to be investigated. Every single one drained resources and time and energy from the actual search for evidence. Detectives were overwhelmed almost immediately. And the press made it worse. Newspapers published graphic details that should never have been made public. Details that contaminated the investigation. Details that made it easier for false confessors to sound credible. One newspaper reportedly paid witnesses for exclusive interviews before investigators could speak to them. Witnesses whose accounts then became unreliable because of financial incentive. The investigation was compromised not just by its own limitations, but by the media environment around it. And here is the detail that rarely gets discussed. Several pieces of physical evidence from the original crime scene were improperly handled or went missing entirely during the investigation. In an era before standardized evidence collection procedures. In a department that was simultaneously managing the press and the public and dozens of false leads. Critical material was lost. This is not speculation. It is documented. And it means that when modern forensic technology eventually became available, there was not enough preserved evidence left to fully utilize it. The window to solve this case using physical evidence may have closed not in 1947, but in the weeks immediately following the discovery. Before anyone understood how much they were losing. Now let us talk about suspects. Because this is where the case becomes genuinely complex. Over the decades, investigators, journalists, and independent researchers have identified dozens of potential suspects. But several names keep returning with more evidence attached to them than the others. The first and most persistent theory centers on a doctor. Not a specific confirmed suspect, but a profile. The precision of the bisection, the anatomical knowledge required, the controlled nature of the crime all point towards someone with medical training. In 1947, Los Angeles had a significant medical community. With hospitals, teaching institutions, private practices. And investigators did look at doctors and medical students. But the records from those early inquiries are incomplete. Many leads were abandoned before they were fully explored. The second major suspect who has attracted serious attention is a man named George Hodel. A physician who lived in Los Angeles in the 1940s. Who had a documented history of violence and manipulation. And who was actually investigated by the Los Angeles Police Department in 1949. 2 years after Elizabeth's death. Surveillance recordings from that investigation reportedly include statements that suggest knowledge of the crime. Hodel's own son Steve Hodel, who worked as a homicide detective for the Los Angeles Police Department, spent years building a case against his father. He published his findings in a book in 2003. He identified physical evidence, circumstantial connections and behavioral patterns that he believed pointed directly to his father. Steve Hodel's research is detailed and methodical. It draws on official records, witness accounts and forensic analysis. But it is not a conviction. It is a theory built on inference. And George Hodel died in 1999 without ever being charged. The third direction that investigators have explored is the possibility of a personal connection. Someone Elizabeth trusted. Someone she would have willingly gone with. Someone whose presence in her life left no obvious trace in the public record. Behavioral analysts have noted that the staging of the body and the communication with the press suggest someone who wanted recognition. Not just from the public, but from investigators specifically. As if the killer wanted to be chased but never caught. That psychological profile aligns with someone who had rehearsed this scenario. Someone for whom the crime itself was not the point. The control was the point. Here is what we know as verified fact versus what remains theory. Verified, Elizabeth Short was killed between January 9 and January 15, 1947. Verified, her body was transported to the discovery site after death. Verified, the bisection required anatomical knowledge and a surgical instrument. Verified, the killer communicated with the press deliberately. Verified. Physical evidence was compromised during the original investigation. Verified, no one has ever been charged. Theory, the killer had formal medical training. Theory, George Hodel was responsible. Theory, Elizabeth knew her killer personally. Theory, the killer committed other crimes before or after. None of the theories have been definitively proven. None have been definitively eliminated either. And that balance between what we know and what we cannot confirm is exactly why this case still lives. Now here is the update that most Black Dahlia videos leave out entirely. In 2021, the Los Angeles Police Department confirmed that their cold case unit had revisited the Black Dahlia file as part of a broader review of unsolved cases from that era. No arrest resulted. No new suspect was publicly named. But the fact that investigators with modern tools and modern training reviewed this file and still could not produce a charge tells you something important about the state of the evidence. It also tells you something about how much was truly lost in those chaotic weeks of 1947. There is also ongoing DNA research happening in academic forensic settings using material from cases of that era. No confirmed link to the Short case has been announced. But the science is advancing. And cases that seemed permanently closed have been reopened by a single biological trace that survived. This case is not officially over. So let us end with the question that has never been answered in 78 years. Was Elizabeth Short killed by someone who knew her specifically? Or was she selected because she was vulnerable and available and alone in a city that did not notice? Because those two answers produce completely different profiles of the killer. If she was targeted personally, then the killer was embedded in her world. Someone she interacted with, someone she trusted, someone who had reason to want her specifically to disappear. If she was chosen randomly, then the killer was hunting. Moving through Los Angeles looking for a certain type of person in a certain type of situation. And Elizabeth simply became the one who could not escape. The answer to that question changes everything about where investigators should have looked. And where they might still look. What we do know is this. The killer had control over themselves and over the situation in a way that suggests this was not their first time managing violence. The communication with the press suggests a need for an audience. The posing of the body suggests a need to be understood. And the 6 days of silence before the discovery suggests a level of patience and planning that goes far beyond impulse. Whoever this person was. They understood how investigations worked. They understood how media worked. They understood how to create noise and then step quietly back into the crowd. Elizabeth Short came to Los Angeles to build a life. She deserved that chance. She deserved to grow old and change her mind about who she was and what she wanted. She did not get that. And the person who took it from her has never answered for it. Not publicly, not legally, not once. 78 years of questions. And still no name. If this case stayed with you, drop a comment below with your theory, not rumor, not gossip, your actual reading of the evidence. Subscribe to Midnight Crime 247 because next week we cover a case where the killer was identified and then walked free anyway. Hit the like button if you believe Elizabeth Short deserves a name attached to her case. We do not stop talking about this until someone has to answer. Midnight Crime 247. The truth belongs to the victim.